Welcome to Call It Podcast, where we bring you inspiring stories and in-depth conversations with people making a difference in their communities. Today, we are thrilled to have Rhee Wild with us. Rhee is a Korean-American para-educator and a passionate advocate for disability rights working in the western suburbs of Chicago. Rhee graduated from the University of Illinois at Chicago in Disability and Human Development Program in 2020 and has since been making significant contribution in the field. With 6 years of experience, Rhee has worked as an educator, media creator, and independent living advocate, tirelessly supporting people with disabilities. As someone on the autism spectrum, Rhee brings a unique and valuable perspective to their work. They're dedicated to creating inclusive space where underrepresented communities such as immigrants, people with disabilities, and the LGBTQ can live with security and dignity. Outside of their advocacy, Rhee enjoys gaming, playing music, and practicing meditation. We're excited to delve into their journey, insights, and the impact they are making. Stay tuned for an enlightening conversation with Rhee Wild. Let's start with how you got into the disability area.
Sure.
How did it come into your attention, and how did you start getting involved in disability-related activities?
It was a very sudden turn, I would say. I was looking for a career pivot, basically. I was in my mid-20s. I had been doing food service work for my entire adult life. Pizza places, coffee, cafes, and things like that. And I was just looking for a change. I'd heard about people working as paraeducators or paraprofessionals. They're basically teachers' aides in primary and secondary settings here, high school, grade school, and transition age students when you're talking about special education. So I tried it out. I got a job out here in the suburbs, and I really loved it just immediately. I felt connected to it. It wasn't a connection I could really describe, but I just loved working with the students so much and forming connections with them. And really just seeing a part of human life that I really never thought of. I wouldn't say I had any disability awareness before then. There's some acquaintances, family members of friends with disabilities, but it was never really talked about. It was acknowledged, but there was no disability awareness of anyone around me, really, just because there weren't any people with visible disabilities around that we needed to account for. I was a very, bubbled person as a young person. So seeing them and loving that work got me thinking about my own identity, actually, and it inspired me to go back to school. I had struggled in school for a long time, since high school, and bounced around different colleges, really trying to figure out who I was and what I wanted to do for over 10 years. And I found the program at UIC, Disability and Human Development, which is a bachelor's program that is interdisciplinary in its approach to disability, really as a phenomenon more than anything. And it was like a salve to me, finding that program. I learned everything. I learned so much. It changed everything for me. And I was coming to a sense of understanding about myself as someone with neurocognitive disabilities. And through that experience, I continued my work. I went back and worked at a school for autistic students. I worked at a CIL in the suburbs here, Center for Independent Living, which services people with disabilities in the surrounding areas. And I currently work back as a paraprofessional. And, throughout the journey, I've been discovering myself in terms of disability. I got tested for autism. I was diagnosed with ADHD, and that really helped me open the door to so many things throughout my life that didn't make sense to me. The difficulties and struggles maybe that I've had that I couldn't account for, and just gave me better understanding to who I was. So that is how I came to disability work and the sphere of disability, I suppose.
What I'm understanding is you have intersecting identities, and you grow up and were educated here in the United States. You later realized that you are living with autism and ADHD, as you just mentioned. So how do these intersecting identities affect you, be it in terms of employment, in terms of your schooling and everything?
I'm adopted from South Korea. I was adopted in 1987. Came here as an infant, 9 months old, into a white family, an American white family. Mother and father. My sister's adopted from Korea as well. So we were a biracial family. There was no question about whether or not we were adopted. It was quite obvious to anybody. So I always grew up with that awareness that I was adopted. And I would not say that cultural self-knowledge came with that. I have long thought of myself as American. I was naturalized as a young infant. I've lived here all my life, and really lived my life according to American culture, American values, and consider myself largely American. That said, the Korean identity, the Asian identity for me was something that I was able to come back to later in life, I think. As a child, as a young person, with autism, and living in a biracial family, I think there was just this real difficulty with self-identity. I really struggled with that for a long time. Not to mention the fact that my gender identity was confusing to me. I recently, figured out that I am a trans woman. So there were all these things that kind of intersected with each other. And I wouldn't say I had a good sense of myself. That was the biggest factor. Didn't know how I related to the people around me. I was such a minority in my community. I stuck out like a sore thumb in many ways. What was, I don't know, I don't want to say lucky for me, but I am what some people will call a high-functioning autistic person. It's a term that really should be disabused now. It doesn't really account for how we should think about the spectrum. But I was good in school as a young person. I was successful in endeavors that I attempted, athletics. So there was never this conspicuous indicator that I had anything going on under the surface. So I would say all those things combined, it was really just kind of this period of not knowing, and from there, things like depression, anxiety, that I've lived with chronically since I was a teenager start to crop up, I think. And they're being solved now that I know a little bit more about myself. But I would say just that lack of self-knowledge was where that intersection really affected me the most, because there were no good references for me to look at in terms of how I should be, and who I actually was as an individual. But that is not a unique story, I think, and I do appreciate the fact that I've had the opportunity to figure that out.
I'm just wondering, you have had some experience with regards to employment. I was just wondering whether there was a moment where you felt you have to disclose your disability, and how was it received? Did you get all the accommodations that you deserve to have?
So in terms of work, asking for accommodations is not something that would ever have occurred to me before this year, actually. Because one, I didn't know it was a thing that people could do. Two, I didn't think I needed anything like an accommodation. And I think when you're not diagnosed or you're unaware, there are these reactions you have mentally, kind of rationalizing things and reacting against things. So I had this strong independent streak, that was fostered in work too. Because work, when I started to work as a young adult, it was the first time I had really had a sense of purpose, I think, or sense of direction. It was, for me as an autistic person, a very limited environment with clear goals and clear structure, and it was something I could flourish in a way that I hadn't for a while, because by then I'd started to really struggle socially and scholastically. But work gave me this sense that I could achieve things, and be, at least a good worker, a good contributor to labor, at least, which we put so much importance into. But, there was a danger there in defining myself through work so much, because I would falter, consequently at all the jobs I had, because I wasn't aware of what I needed. I worked, some would say, low-skill jobs. I wouldn't necessarily say that. They were demanding in other ways, but really my struggle was just not understanding that I needed some of the things that I needed. Breaks, space, and just, I didn't have strategies for myself either. So that was part of it too. But, without any of that awareness, it becomes really difficult to know what accommodations really are important, and building that awareness, just not for me, but for the people around me. Which is why now is so nice, because I work at a school, at a high school, and people have been very accommodating to me. It really is something as, I need to go take a walk, maybe. Or I just need some space for a few minutes. Making sure I have what I need throughout the day, and people respect that, which is, for me, a completely new thing, just to even ask for the help. But I found it to be very accommodating ever since I started to know what to ask for. But I will say that it hasn't been an easy transition, being able to ask for those things. And I'm sorry if I'm long-winded, but there's an experience I had working in the disability field, and it really wasn't. It's something that I have a hard time looking back on and reckoning with a little bit, because I was just then starting to figure out my disability status, and really felt that I did need a lot of things at work at that time. I was really struggling. I felt like I was underwater at that job. And I did not feel necessarily that it was a comfortable environment for me to do that, just because of the demands of the work, actually. So it became this tense situation of fit. And I really loved that job, though. So it was something I really struggled with for a little bit after that, because I wanted to stay in that job, but it just became such a struggle for me. And it's hard to say what could have been done differently, because I didn't know yet. But also, could the environment fostered more openness to things? Maybe. So I think there's multiple sides to this. Self-advocacy is important for people like me, especially, I would say. But yeah, also the responsibility of the culture here, because even when disability is a focus, and I've been in different environments now with that focus, things can fall through the cracks as far as awareness goes, which, lends itself to the idea that disability is an ongoing thing that we learn about. It is a complex issue that we will never know everything about.
That's really a struggle that I am hearing. if you do not really know how to stand for yourself or how to advocate for yourself, then you definitely are treading just troubled waters. That's really quite challenging. You still want to do the job, but you're not really sure how to get best accommodated at work. But now I think you feel like you are at a better school setting that is more understanding. Whether this school community is doing this out of volition or out of full awareness for your condition and what have you. Have you brought up this idea of accommodation? If so, what did they do?
I haven't officially done anything like that. And it is something I've considered doing. And there's something that holds me back from doing it. And I think it has to do with this sense that while I admire so much the work that we do as an institution, and I really do, love and appreciate my colleagues and think we do a good job with what we're trying to achieve, raising up these students and training them for an adult life, there are these cracks. There are these misapplications of theories and strategies. This division, and this is something I've learned in my studies that I'm sure you're aware of, the models of disability. Mm-hmm. There is, amongst most people in society, just by default, this medical view towards disability, which is basically a prescriptive kind of definition based more on lack than abundance. And for me, as someone who really views the world through the social lens, there is a disconnect there, even amongst people who are trying their very best with their full hearts to do the work that I care about. And most of the time we do come to Congress with things, but there's so much there still I feel that needs to be done to bring these services to the point where the students would feel comfortable enough even to voice some of the things going on with them. Because I don't know if this space, and we're learning, and things are getting there. We progress and evolve, but it's slow. It's slow for me. And some of my misapprehension with disclosing my disability and other things, I'm sure is tied to that. Because as someone who's lived here all my life, I do have those feelings. I think we're a good people, well-meaning, but even when we mean the best, even when we're nice and kind, damage can be done when ideas are thrown around and misapplied.
In what way do you think does work contribute to your personal identity?
Work is crucial for me. I've struggled to separate my sense of worth from work solely, because for so long, that is how I viewed my worth. I found capability through work. It made me feel like I could actually live an adult life, until inevitably I would burn out at these jobs and fail and move on. That cycle, I think, has abated. And now for me, I'm finding joy in work with a purpose. It's always been, and I think a luxury for me, but it's always been so instrumental for me to find work with a purpose that I can justify to myself at the end of the day, and feel okay doing. So I work as a paraeducator. I'm also working with an organization that provides recreational services for people with disabilities, and doing this work with UIC, and it is some of the happiest time of my life because of the work. But that's tied to my personal development too. I think I would not be empowered or enabled to do any of this, get any of this done, without the opportunity I've had to get better, to get myself well. Because for so long I was a working person who was not well. It just felt like this drudgery and this road to nowhere. And looking at conditions, it's so easy to legitimately feel those things. But for me now, the purpose I find through work, the meaning, and the goals I have for it are what drive me every day. So it's extremely important to me.
You've worked with a lot of employers in your life, and are there specific industries or job types that you found to have barriers or to be less disability friendly?
I've worked mostly in food, so restaurants and fast food, delivery services, and in education. And those are considered low-skill jobs, the jobs I've had, low-entry jobs. So it's interesting, I think, because those are often the only sectors that are available to people with disabilities in this country, regardless of anything else, just the very status of someone with a disability. So for me, I always felt, I don't know, maybe this resentment towards it, because so many of the people I've encountered with disabilities have been cloistered or sequestered to these stations, when that's the whole problem to me, is that we don't open up the idea of what makes someone qualified. There is so much rigmarole, I think, that gets considered for people in employment that has nothing to do with their qualifications and their potential. And especially given our commitment in this country to the value of opportunity, to equality, to the idea that every person is capable of being independent, and having liberty, it makes it all the more disappointing. Yeah, so I would say even in those jobs, just how people are treated as employees, regardless of disability, and especially when they do have a disability. It's just kind of like you're an afterthought. Okay, yes, we're employing you, and through my work with vocational programs for transition age students, for high school students, there's a limit there that seems to be hit for the people that we're servicing in terms of what we're willing to explore, what we're willing to consider. And I think that extends to adult life. When we talk about job placement organizations and people who assist people in the workforce, it's a cap that is artificial, because there are too many talents I've seen from people with disabilities that would be beneficial to us as a society and as a workforce. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like I have a lot to say on this, but it's not really coming to me, so I'll just stop there.
So based on your work experience as well as advocacy work, what do you think is missing? What should be done?
We give a lot of attention now to some of the important issues. We're getting better at identifying some of the lacks we have as a society in providing equality and justice in our services, and at least recognizing it. More programming, more trainings. But even with those, and you talk about words like inclusion and equity, those are buzzwords, and, you know, they mean a lot, and I think we all recognize that, but implementing it, that is where I think the best opportunities are falling short, because there's a recognition that there is an issue that needs to be amended, but there's an extra couple steps that need to be taken here. When we talk about who's participating in these groups, who is providing the expertise, who is involved with the decisions about what gets included and what doesn't in these trainings, what information matters. And for me, it's always been important to get people who are intimately involved with these things in their lives, with these experiences, people with disabilities. We talk about our mission here for people, refugees and immigrants and asylees in the workforce. Hearing their voices about what they think could be done to include people more, to provide more equity. These are the areas where we can make real inroads, because otherwise we're just putting this tarp or this wallpaper over the problem, and it creates this illusion that we're addressing things, but yeah, and I have to acknowledge it's a process, and we have good intentions in these things, and these are the best cases too. In so many places still, I believe that this kind of initiative and awareness is still badly lacking. So, and there's probably a lot of reasons for that. Our issues as a civil society, I think, hold us back from recognizing people with disabilities more, because it's a civic issue to me, our recognition of the basic rights that are missing from a lot of people's lives, a lot of citizens' lives living here.
Given all those experiences and your intersecting identities, I'm just wondering whether there were some opportunities that you avoided because of who you are.
I think that goes back to this sense of I wasn't getting the most out of myself for a long time, because I knew there were plenty of jobs that I probably wouldn't be fit for, just because of this overriding anxiety I had in social life, around people, in public, even working in public-facing jobs like food service and education. It was always this struggle. It was like something I kind of just bared, this anxiety and this feeling of alienation, this inability to really connect with people, and this forcedness that I felt psychologically. There are a lot of things I've been interested in, and I mentioned I changed my major quite a few times. I really love music. I studied that. Political science, I was interested in that, and international issues. But I would always hit this limiting point in my mind. I would burn out, mentally, physically, because I didn't know how to take care of myself. My executive functioning was not good. And, my sense of why I was doing any of it was not there. So I would always talk myself out of things. I would always denigrate myself and assume that the thing I wanted really wasn't possible. And that was kind of the default position I've had for such a long time. I wasn't aware that my disabilities were directly influenced by that, or vice versa, that they were such a factor. I didn't know, but once I figured out my profile and reflected more on myself and my experiences, now I'm able to better understand what I'm capable of, connecting things that I want to do to actually doing them. And it's a process. It's a process for me because I've lived with that default mentality for so long that I couldn't. And I wouldn't say it was any one person or one thing. It wasn't like I was, explicitly discriminated against, I would say, or anything. It was just, really this sense within myself and the feedback I got because I just wasn't in my life. You know, I wasn't fully living it. I didn't understand what I was capable of. Seeing people around me and seeing what they did, you know, I always celebrated that, but it was always like kind of tapping on the glass, not understanding why I couldn't find the door. So, self-knowledge and understanding has really helped me with that.
It was most recently that you realized that you are living with these challenging situations and conditions, particularly when it comes to employment. But what barriers are most significant for you when you are looking for employment?
Barriers for me, a lot of it is pace of work, which I never really realized because I was always in fast-paced work, and I was wondering why am I so anxious? But really the pace of work, the communication styles of the people I'm working with. It's important for me to be communicated with, not in a very particular way, but communication in general, just knowing what the job is and what our responsibilities are day to day. You know, that's important for me to have defined roles and expectations. It's important for me to have a good culture. And that's not so much of an accommodation, so much as just a personal thing. But, you know, I've had experiences where, like, with my autism, where conflicts between people in the workplace have been really stressful. I'm someone who thrives on harmony and people talking things out and being committed. So that is a really personal thing that kind of sneaks in with my disability because I'm just so stringent about things that need to be done sometimes. I'm very organizationally driven and organized. So, you know, it's important for me to have that structure in place in a job. But again, like some of these things, it's difficult. It's not like I can go and demand these things, right? So, you know, it's partly me adjusting and, you know, imposing my own values to where I'm living, you know, being the example, and also figuring out what I can ask for, what things are available to me, because I think I'm lucky enough to be able to ask now. Is that available to everybody? Absolutely not. I think for the vast majority of people, that's not the case. And everything we have in our ADA says otherwise. We supposedly put a lot of these issues to bed a long time ago in 1991. But so many of these issues persist. It seems slow. So finding ways for people to communicate in the workplace with each other, regardless of disability, I think is an important thing for me, an important area for everybody to look at. Not just disability, but language as well. You know, we talk about our intersections with multicultures, with people who have been displaced, who are seeking asylum in the U.S. And that's an issue too in terms of accessibility that I see, you know, at my work with many of the students who are coming in with their families. So it remains an ongoing effort, I think, to make sure that we are actually following through with our values, that we're doing the day-to-day work of being with each other and communicating that will get us to where we all want to go.
When do you think is an employer inclusive and when is it bad?
An employer is inclusive when they care genuinely about all their employees, when they are aware of at least some of the major possibilities of inclusion, some of the possibilities of the kinds of people that they will be working with, and that could provide something to their organization. I think that it is a major dereliction in the modern age to not be aware of at least the issue of disability and of language. And, you know, we all lived through this very interesting time with the pandemic where we were all experiencing some of these limiting factors with communication, with how we socialize, and with work, certainly. So we should know better, I think, about what everybody needs in a workplace. And I think with that attitude, and just a little bit of the knowledge to start with, you know, if you're completely unfamiliar with some of the finer issues that, like taking into the practical reality of what accommodating a person actually means, as long as you have that operating philosophy, I think anything is possible, because I've seen it. But when you don't, then it's almost like this lock. It closes the door. Not completely, but it makes it really hard to see some of those missing pieces, for sure.
Mm-hmm. This is my last question. Could you share with me what your workday looked like?
So my workday, as a paraeducator, I am solely interested in supporting the students that I work with. Supporting in the way of if they are having difficulty with a lesson, finding some way to adapt that lesson for them to learn it. If they're having some kind of social or emotional issue, being there for them. Sometimes it's just simply being there. Our function is so much just simply showing up for them. And because it's hard to find community, I think, for many of them. People with difficult family backgrounds, people with social difficulties, related to their disability or not. Figuring out the world around them and how to be in it. I mentioned the COVID thing, and they all lived through that too. So it's just, seeing it evolve the last 6 years that I've been in schools, there's such a need to just understand that these young people are not just receptacles to be filled with information. They're not just to be passed through the system, because I've seen what happens down the line when we do that. Working with many young adults and older adults with disabilities, providing services where they should have been provided for them long before, and we continue that. We let that wheel continue to spin when we just check off the boxes of special education. When we say, oh, we're providing this or that, support. We have this thing for them. We did this thing once, it's a constant support that needs to be applied for this population. these young people, because that's the guidance they need. And so that's my approach every day. And it's been that way for a while, but, yeah, it's a fantastic job though. And, I've met so many different kinds of people through it, and I see the brightness and vitality and newness, of these young people now. And if we can encourage them to create the world that we believe in, I think we could see amazing things.
Thank you for sharing your work experiences as well as personal experiences in your life.